โมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Your blessings, we come to the end of the first day of our retreat. There's something that the Buddha never said, was that he could make people enlightened. Make people go beyond suffering, reach liberation, nibbana. It's not something he could transmit or pass on from one person to another in that way. He said his role, he's the Tathagata, his role is to show the way, explain the way, teach the way. But he can't do the practice for us, which for some people at first can be a bit disappointing because we'd all like to have a great figure, a great spirit watching over us, doing the practice for us, nudging us along, getting us there. So that we don't have to do much, we don't have to expend effort, that we don't have to go through all the problems and obstacles. But that's not the way it works. The Buddha taught the Eightfold Noble Path and gave that to us as a way for us to practice. These are qualities, 8 qualities that have to be cultivated by each individual. And they're all cultivated in our mind, and that's why practicing meditation in particular, and in a retreat situation where you keep 8 precepts, do sitting and walking meditation, listen to the Dhamma, simplify your life is so valuable because you have all your time and energy to devote to cultivating the Eightfold Noble Path. And it's a gradual or cumulative effect on the mind over time. These qualities are arising and they support each other like 8 friends or 8 parts of the whole. Many of the forest Ajahns talk about the practice as a circle, closing up the circle by cultivating the Eightfold Path. Or they talk about it as a wheel. As we see in Buddhism, we have the symbolism of the wheel everywhere, the Dhammacakka wheel. And they have different numbers of spokes depending on what it's depicting. So sometimes 12 spokes of that wheel depict the teaching on dependent origination. Understanding the cause of suffering, how it arises, so that one can abandon that. Sometimes the wheel has 8 spokes, the 8 factors of the Noble Path. Right view, right thought, right action, right speech, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right samadhi. And just like a wheel for a bicycle or any other thing, any other vehicle, if one of the spokes is missing, the wheel starts to go wonky and very quickly will collapse. So this is why true Buddhism, or the true Buddhist path, contains all 8 factors working together, being developed together, cultivated together. If we miss out one part or neglect one part, then all of the factors and the whole result, the mind, your mind will not get to where it wants to go. The wheel won't turn, the wheel won't roll. This is also another disappointment to people sometimes when they wake up to this fact, because we all come to practice Buddhism first by hearing the teachings and reading the teachings. And we might be able to remember the teachings quite well. Our education system and our, the way of communicating Dhamma even is quite good these days. We have so many supports, technology and books and recordings and places to practice. So it's quite possible for people to gain a lot of knowledge quite quickly. But this knowledge is still what we say sanya, it's memory. And it is vital for the practice, but it's not the whole practice. And yet sometimes we mistake it for the whole practice. If we can explain the Dhamma, remember it, we know it, then we can think, that's it, that's the path, we've developed the path. So what we often do then is go off and teach it and talk about it. Ajahn Chah always used to remind us that the Dhamma of words, of memory, the intellectual side of the Dhamma, the words in the books, in the texts, are one thing, and the experience of the Dhamma in your heart is different. It's another thing. The words greed, anger, delusion, which are the kilesas, they are one thing written down on a page. They're another thing when they arise in your heart. So the cultivation of the Eightfold Path is always leading back to your heart, your citta, or we say the one who knows, or the quality of knowing. And there's no way around that. We have to keep developing this inner awareness. It's not to say that what we learn and hear is not valuable and helpful. It can be, of course. And depending on your character, some people really like to contemplate and think through the Dhamma, learn the Dhamma very well. They learn even Pali language, learn the suttas, and that's good, up to a point. But it still won't free your heart from greed, anger and delusion. That has to come through directing your attention inwards and recognizing these qualities for what they are. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat. Anger on the page is not the same as anger in your heart. Anger on the page is pretty passive. It's just a word which might be useful if you're considering, how does anger arise, what to do about it, what's its nature. Well, you can write all that down. You can remember the words. But in a situation that triggers anger within you, it's a different thing, isn't it? Even this much we know, we can probably remember this much. Anger in the heart is different from anger on the page, but still we are subject and conditioned by experiences that may bring up anger, from mild irritation through to boiling rage. And all the other sources of suffering in our life and in our mind are the same. So these 8 factors of the path are steering us, guiding us towards knowing this mind and purifying the mind through the the practice of cultivating the Eightfold Path. As we're sitting right here, you might say, well, I'm not keeping precepts. I did that this morning. I took the precepts, the 8 precepts in that ceremony. But you are keeping the precepts because that's part of what you're doing here, and it's having an effect on your mind right now. You're not killing, stealing, committing acts of sexual misconduct here right now, so you are keeping precepts, practicing right livelihood, practicing right effort in the best way you can, abandoning negative mental states that you may have recognized are arising, cultivating the wholesome mental states. And you have right view that is informing that, guiding that. So all the factors of the path are here right now. They may not yet be perfect, but they're affecting us right now in a good way. But we have to keep deepening the practice, repeating it, deepening it, and learning from our experience so that we can understand, well, where does suffering come from? How do we end up angry sometimes? Is it just random or comes out of the stratosphere, out of the earth? Or are there specific causes and conditions to lead up to the experience of anger, sorrow, disappointment, selfishness, worry, anxiety, fear, all these different kilesas? They have causes and conditions, and this is what we are directing our mindfulness to learn about, observe, and ultimately abandon. That's our aim, because they're the cause of suffering. So when we're practicing meditation in particular, we're developing consistent, persistent, continuous mindfulness the best we can. It can be tiring, it can be frustrating. We all know we have many moments when we're not particularly mindful. Nevertheless, we continue to put effort in to improve our level of mindfulness. And as we do that, then we'll experience states of calm as well, because it's just a natural result when you're practicing mindfulness. The body and mind settles down. We feel more relaxed. The less distracted we are, the more mental energy we have. It's more conserved for the practice. Our mind becomes brighter, becomes more under our observation, the more mindfulness we have. Even when we lose mindfulness, we're quick to see that. The more we train, the more we practice. And we develop skillful attitudes that help us to deal with some of the cravings and attachments that we all experience. You're getting to see your own body and mind from a place of observation, calm, detached observation, which is what mindfulness allows. And the stronger our mindfulness is, the more we can do that, the more we can maintain mindfulness in different situations. And most people understand this point. If you practice meditation regularly, the benefits and the results are not just simply when you're sitting on the meditation cushion. Even though you may have some very deep, profound meditations and experience deep states of calm and stillness or insight that seems to be really clear, there'll also be other times where mindfulness is improved because of your meditation practice, after the retreat or after a meditation. And you can also gain mindfulness, more mindfulness, insight, states of calm. They can arise because of the conditioning factor of having put effort into your practice. Then later it comes up again in the right situation. We can't always predict when the situation will be, but listening to the experiences of other meditators and practitioners, we can see it does happen that way as well. Ajahn Chah used to say, everything is teaching us. But we have to open our heart to see that and take in these lessons that are there. So as we practice mindfulness, we do start to be much more observant of reality and the nature of things. And we see things that we didn't see before. We understand more what is a wholesome state of mind, what are wholesome qualities of mind where we didn't see them or know them so much before. So sometimes people describe their practice and they say sometimes you're just in a more normal situation, doing some chores, cleaning, washing, sitting in a car in a traffic jam, going to work, going here, going there. States of stillness can sometimes arise. People can go into states of samadhi sometimes. Or have deep feelings of peace come over them, or deep insights into the three characteristics: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self. Profound states of compassion can arise sometimes. And this is the cumulative effect from the practice you've done. It just may not be in a situation you expected it. In one way, that's the marvel, the magic of Dhamma. It's not bound by time and place, but it does have to come about through the efforts we make in developing the path, sila, samadhi, panya, taking time, taking interest into looking after our mind and cultivating mindfulness and contemplating things, training ourselves in that. It's very common that people during a retreat, when they're not in the meditation hall or even after the retreat, they've gone home, things hit them, things dawn on them. The light bulb moments, the light comes up in the mind, they realize something they were clinging to drops away. Maybe some anger that they were holding on, a negative view of themselves or someone else, they finally realize this is to be abandoned. Maybe some pain that was coming up, mental or physical pain that was coming up, drops away at some point. And this is a result of the practice we've done previously, coming together. Or hearing some news, or seeing a very ordinary experience, but seeing the Dhamma in it. Cleaning up some rubbish, or washing dishes, or sweeping leaves, very ordinary things. The Dhamma comes in when mindfulness is there. We're aware of our posture, our mind, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're experiencing, and we see Dhamma in that moment. We see the impermanent nature of things. Leaves grow on the trees in the spring and the summer, and then they fall off in the winter, and you see the cycle of birth and death just in sweeping leaves, maybe. Or you cook some food, have a meal, wash the dishes, and you're just seeing the impermanent nature of things. You don't stay full from that meal forever. Later you have to go and find more food and eat again. Life is full of cycles and repetitive actions, repetitive experiences, but the important thing is, where's your mind at as you're going through these cycles or experiencing them? And when mindfulness is there, then insight and wisdom starts to arise quite naturally. We may have to nudge it along by consciously contemplating things, looking, but it's not something you force, but quite naturally when you're mindful you notice things, you observe things, and it teaches your mind. Everything teaches us. Then people will say, well, how do you get insight? How do you know you've had an insight? Well, one way of knowing insight is that it should be leading to feelings of peace, calm, letting go, relinquishment, turning away from that which brings you suffering, which is clinging, attachment, holding on, identifying strongly with feelings, emotions, mental states that bring us suffering. Clinging to material things, clinging to people, clinging to our ideals and our desires and wishes brings suffering. Letting go, relinquishment, brings peace. And just as when you carry something heavy, after a while it's a burden. When you recognize it's a burden, you put it down. Whether it's a physical thing or just the mental baggage you've been carrying around for a while. When you see it's painful, it's suffering to hold on, you're ready to let go and put it down. When you see you can put it down because it's not really you, it's not self, then you can put it down. And we just practice this in whatever part of our life we're in, whatever aspect of our life is coming up, whatever we're experiencing, that's where you practice. So it's impossible to predict this or tell people exactly how it's going to go. What the Buddha did was give you the tools, the means to develop insight, understanding, let go of your suffering, but then you have to practice and it will unfold according to your particular karma, personality, character. Ajahn Chah himself said that he had all kinds of very ordinary insights in the beginning that would be no different from us. So that's another thing. We often think those people who seem to get results in the practice are very special people. They're not me, I'm just ordinary and I'm full of problems and stress and worries. But actually, you read the biography of Ajahn Chah or other enlightened masters, they come from exactly the same place as us. They were born with a body, with hopes and fears, and they grew up experiencing pleasure and pain, did very ordinary things just like us. But they became interested in Dhamma and started practicing, and they didn't stop practicing, so they built a cumulative amount of mindfulness and sila and wisdom. Gradually those things grew up out of their practice. If you look at Ajahn Chah's life, the first time he went off to become a novice monk, he was fed up with working on a farm, the suffering of the farming life in a poor rural community. He said he was so fed up going out and doing the heavy work of watering the plants in the dry season. You have to haul water from a well, carry it, it's very heavy. He'd water tobacco plants for his family. It's one thing that people would grow in the dry season. He said, every day I'm hauling water, watering the tobacco plants, and I never even get to smoke it anyway, because he was a kid. It's so miserable. Another thing that got him kind of thinking about going into the monastery was when the rice threshing machine, which is basically hand driven, you have a grindstone and a pounder that's wood and a lever that holds the wood, lifts it up and down, and that broke. And then they're trying to fix it because it's the necessary thing to, once the rice is harvested, you've got to thresh it and separate the rice from the chaff. It's broken, so they're trying to fix it, and then in the course of fixing it, a piece of wood hit him on the head, really hurt him, and again it's like, that's it, I'm off to the monastery. Very ordinary experience, but it kind of symbolized, the suffering of life. We have to go through hardships. Life is often full of hardships and not very rewarding. It's just one thing after another, isn't it? So for him, that was enough to say, I'm off to the monastery. That looked, for him, that looked like a way to learn the way to understand suffering and get beyond it. He didn't stay a novice, he went back to being a layperson a while before he became a monk. But then another prompt to become a monk was the girl that he'd fallen for and that was planning to marry maybe, was taken by his friend, his best friend. It was out of his hands because in those days the parents decided who went with who, an arranged marriage. So more disappointment, back into the monastery. And they're not the only insights or reasons that would have put him into the monastery, but they're very ordinary experiences that we all have. Disappointment in love, the hardships of earning a living, the hardships of living in the world, illness, problems with other people, money, trouble, whatever it is, this is what we call the suffering of existence. And he had some insight that there is a way out of this, following the Buddha's path. And when he became a monk, he had plenty of suffering like the rest of everyone. Attachment to food, attachment to lust, attachment to comparing with other people, disappointments, dealing with his own ambitions, dealing with desires and disappointments all the time, anger, fear. No different than anyone else, he went through all of that, as all these other enlightened teachers have done since the Buddha. But he didn't give up. He kept practicing. When he was a young monk, he first left the monastery to go wandering in the forest with some other monks. Up until then, they'd lived quite a steady, comfortable life in a village monastery, studying the teachings, which is good. But he realized, the words themselves are not enough. You have to practice, develop mindfulness, develop states of samadhi, and contemplate to see the impermanent nature of your body and mind. He realized he had to practice, so they left, going to look for a meditation master. And they took everything with them, kind of the Thai farmer's version of everything, including the kitchen sink. But instead of the kitchen sink, they took the mortar and pestle, stone mortar, stone pestle, packed that into the bag on their shoulder. They got all their robes and gear and extras, including a mortar and pestle, just in case they can't grind the chili. Because food was hard to come by. If you have a bit of chili, you grind it, maybe you can have rice and chili and you'll get by for the day with the taste of the chili. But you walk down a road for a few hours in the heat of the day, that mortar and pestle gets heavy. So that was the first thing they gave away. The first relinquishment on the path to enlightenment was giving up carrying the mortar and pestle. Give it to some lucky villager. But these are the kind of things we learn on the way, don't we? We learn what we really need to practice. That's why we keep 8 precepts sometimes. You simplify what you're using, what you need to practice. We don't need a lot of things. Just eat in the morning, simple bed, don't need a lot of entertainments, distractions. This is so we channel our energy into developing mindfulness and recognizing kilesa and abandoning kilesa over and over again. Lifestyle supports that, so we chuck out the TV, we chuck out the mortar and pestle, and we feel lighter for it. It may be harder. You've got the worry of, well, what will I do when I encounter food that's not very tasty? But you just give up to the practice, don't you? You trust in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, you trust in the training. As a monk, you trust in your Vinaya and your training. As a layperson, you trust in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha and the precepts you keep. So you can set aside a lot of worries and anxieties. If you keep the precepts, already it's channeling your mind in a good direction. You don't have a lot of regrets or agitation. And you don't know what's going to come up ahead of you, but your mind is ready because you have faith, you have your practice of precepts, you have a certain level of happiness, and then you're practicing mindfulness every day and contemplating Dhamma, learning from your experience. So really, whether you're a layperson or a Sangha member, it's the same. You're going in the same direction. And you trust in the practice. When you have faith in Buddha, it gives you a lot of confidence and trust to carry on, because you know you're not out to hurt anyone, hurt yourself. You may not yet know everything because you've only learned from the outside first. Now you're practicing from the inside. You may not know what your mind will bring up or how many emotional states you'll have to go through, how many times you'll reach despair, but you trust in the goodness of the practice and you're willing to learn and keep going, then you can go. You can set aside the worries. As you get into the practice, well, maybe more deeper kinds of suffering emerge. The suffering you experience in the beginning is often very ordinary level suffering, like painful knees, painful back, or feeling tired or sleepy, or just too many thoughts about this and that. Very ordinary kind of suffering. Daily suffering is quite normal for everyone. But as you go deeper into the practice and you keep going, maybe stronger states of attachment come up that you're noticing that you didn't notice before. They come up out of your unconscious maybe. And so sometimes you get strong sexual desire, or strong rage, or anger, or strong fear, worry. But because you've learned to trust in the practice and you've been developing these skills, well, you're ready to face anything. You don't know what life will bring you, what the practice will bring you, but you're developing right view so you can deal with it. So Ajahn Chah himself, we look at Ajahn Chah as the enlightened teacher, beyond everything, beyond the world, wise, compassionate. But to become that, he went through a lot of fear of living in the forest with diseases and little medicine or medical help, wild animals with no protection, fear of ghosts, fear of the unknown, fear of not knowing where the next meal will come from. He went through lots of fear. As we know, the night of his, he was in the cremation ground. He'd go and stay in cremation grounds regularly to work with fear and contemplate it. Where is it coming from? How can I abandon it? And he spent a whole night once just in intense fear because he thought there was ghosts around him. There was a dead body left in the cremation ground. And he didn't dare move the whole night. He was just contemplating, letting go of fear, facing fear and letting it go. And in the morning, he had been there all night, so his urine had turned to blood. He had temporary inflammation of the bladder or whatever. So it's not like Ajahn Chah didn't have to go through fear, desire for food, sleepiness, worry and anxiety. He went through all of that as well, just like we are. But he didn't give up. He didn't stop. So those who gain the Dhamma, understand the Dhamma, they've been through much suffering, but they've used the Dhamma to deal with it. They develop right view, they develop the faith and trust in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, in the way of practice. Even just trusting in the meditation object is important, isn't it? Trusting to give up everything to recite Buddho or follow the breath. That will bring up doubts. There'll be endless thoughts that scream at you as you meditate, saying, this thought is more important than your watching the breath. And you have all the explanations coming up in your mind why you have to think about that thing. So say you're on this retreat and you've got some business coming up next week. It'll come into your mind saying, think about this. You've got to plan this job or traveling to this place or that bit of activity. I've got to think about it now, sort it all out now, so I don't need to watch the breath. These are the tricks of kilesas, they say. Your own mind is tricking you, saying, don't watch the breath and bring up mindfulness. Just follow the story of your mind at this moment, thinking about that bit of work or what you're going to eat tomorrow, or that friend you've got to see, or that person that you've got to sort out. It will come up, won't it? And at the moment it comes out, if you're not mindful, it'll trick you straight away. This is what I've got to think about. And you'll forget the breath. So you have to be ready to trust in going back to the breath and letting go of all this stuff. One thing I always found helpful is you just make a note of whatever it was that was bothering you in your meditation, that important thing you must think about as you're trying to watch the breath. And then when you finish your meditation, does it come up and bother you then? Is it really that important? No. You finish your meditation, you go away and you think of 101 other things And when you catch that, you realize, oh, it wasn't so important after all. So when you're meditating, why do you really need to think about that stuff? If you've been through that a few times, then you're wiser, aren't you? You're smarter. So when it's coming up again, you say, oh, I've seen this before. You know, the reasoning of the mind that I must sort this problem out now in my meditation, so I won't watch the breath, I'll just think it through, then I'll be settled, then I'll go back to the breath. It never works, does it? You're just endlessly thinking. Then you get disappointed because you're not with the breath and you think you're no good at meditation, and it piles on and on and on, and you feel really depressed at the end. Everyone's been through that. So you have to teach yourself, and don't follow the tricks of the mind, the tricks of the kilesas. All those nice things you want to think about that make you feel good, no, set it aside. All that self-criticism, you're feeling bad about yourself because you didn't do this, you didn't do that, no, set that aside as well. All the important things, problems in your life you've got to solve, no, set it aside. Just be willing to let go of everything and trust in the breath, and then things start to improve. You feel better when you let go. You're putting down the heavy baggage of the mind. You're throwing out the mortar and pestle, you're throwing out the business plan, you're throwing out the social engagements, the travel plans, the reactions to pain in your knee. Just throw it all out and trust in the breath, and you start to experience the peaceful mind, the still breath, the beautiful breath. Your mind improves when you do this. This is what mindfulness allows to happen. Seeing thoughts as just thoughts. They're not that important. Feelings are just feelings. Even painful ones can disappear. If you keep watching them, they'll disappear, they'll change. Pleasant feelings, they're enjoyable, but they'll also change. So you don't let them catch you out, saying, oh, I've got to indulge in this bit of pleasure and think of this and enjoy that. That will also change. So we often use a bit of wisdom as we practice, noticing the changing nature of our experience, how the body, the feelings in the body and sensations in the body are changing. Thoughts and memories come and go. And if you keep sticking with it, what's left is this quality of mindfulness in the middle, and out of that develops stillness. It can be passing stillness or deep stillness that lasts for a long time. And the quietness, the stillness of the mind that you experience is coming from a firmness of mindfulness. Even when that state of samadhi passes, you come back to, you might say, a more normal level of the mind. Mindfulness is improved, isn't it? It's improved, and then it can follow up and learn lessons. And that's where insight arises. Noticing the impermanent, selfless nature of this body. You can only do so much to keep it in good shape and keep it comfortable, but you can't absolutely control it. The way thoughts arise, pass away, the way they stimulate feelings of pleasure and pain. But if you're mindful, you're no longer clinging, are you? You're watching, observing and letting go. So as mindfulness improves with the practice of samadhi, then you can develop some true wisdom and truly let go. You can let go of anger. It's been bothering you for so long, even justified anger because that person really hurt you and you really need to sort them out and get them back. And now you can see the suffering. When you're mindful, you see it's not worth it. Let it go, move on. So mindfulness, well practiced, backed by sila, samadhi, allows you to start letting go of greed, anger, delusion, craving and attachment. This is how Ajahn Chah has practiced, this is how other teachers have practiced, and we just have to keep doing it. Keep learning, keep practicing, and things improve. So maybe for tonight I'll leave you with these reflections, and in a moment we'll end the session.